Caribbean and Nigerian Studies program, and very happy to see such a great turnout today for this talk. As you probably noticed, there's some snacks and coffee and tea in the back there, as well as a bunch of handouts about some other events that we have coming up. I did want to mention that this lecture is part of a whole month of Brazil that we have. There's a handout back there as well that has information about all of the other upcoming. There's some musical performances, some other lectures, etc. A film as part of the Wisconsin Film Festival that are all Brazil focused. So that's all I really have to say. Except welcome, thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to Lisa to introduce our speaker.
Hi. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Lisa Rausch. I work on Brazil issues about land use change over in the Nelson Institute. And I'm really excited to introduce to you a friend of mine for going on several years now. We decided, and former colleague when we were both doing our PhDs in different departments at the University of Kansas. This is Pedro dos Santos, and he's an assistant professor at Luther College, just down the road in Iowa. And he's here to talk to, well, he's an expert on gender issues in Brazilian politics. And he has a couple of projects that are going on right now about women's representation in the country of Brazil, in particular. One project that explores Dilma Rousseff's impact on women's representation in Brazil, and another dealing with the impact of Brazilian electoral institutions on the election of women to legislative positions. So these are two very live topics, and I think it's a real privilege to be able to hear Pedro's perspective right now at this really critical juncture in Brazilian politics. And with that, I'll just keep it brief and hand it over to Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Lassi's and the Brazil Initiative for inviting me to do this talk, and it's good timing, I guess, right, for this talk. My research is, I got to backtrack a little bit. So in 2010, I was in Brazil doing field work for my dissertation, which was on women's election of women to state legislatures in Brazil, and the impact of the quota law in Brazil. But it was 2010, and it was when Dilma was elected. So I was there through all the election process. So just by looking at that and seeing how things were going, that got me interested. And then by talking to other scholars, friends of mine, colleagues of mine now, we decided to start doing digging a little deeper on that. So today I'm gonna talk about my research, but I'm gonna keep that brief because I really would like to kind of open up for discussion. The more interesting stuff, which is the current political crisis. So I'll give you some updates. I literally was checking my phone right now to make sure that there's nothing else that was going on today. There's already one arrest today of a former senator. There's other things going on already, so maybe we can talk about that. In this institutional political kind of perspective, which is the part I'm more interested in and more specialized in. So I'll start to talk about women's representation in general, like where is the kind of the base of my research, and then look at Dilma Rousseff specifically, right? So just really quick, the literature on especially the gender and politics literature, the one that I'm kind of borrow from mostly, really focus on Hannah Pitkin's idea of representation, right? So the idea of symbolic, descriptive, substantive, and also these three being the three big ones. The argument is that they're connected. They kind of go. Representation is a bigger thing. It's a bigger kind of umbrella. And all those things kind of fit within the idea of representation. So symbolic meaning that what the representative means for those represented. In general, kind of this means like a lot of what does this mean to democracy? What does this mean to people feeling represented in the system? So like, does a woman specifically have any impact on the population in general views of democracy, but specifically the views of women on democracy as well? Descriptive, which is really where the research on women's representation really started, which is like how many women are getting elected, and how are they getting elected, which is kind of the first generation research on women's representation really came from that area. And then substantive representation, which is like the actions taken on behalf of, in the interest of, as an agent of, or substitute for those represented. So does the person representing the citizen, doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the race, and all those different things. So I've been really sticking to gender in Brazil. I have not delved into the intersectionality yet of race. We're getting there. This year was the first year they actually had data on TSE collected data on race for candidates. So this, I think in the near future we're going to have some discussion of representation in that, because this is the first year, so we'll be able to kind of collect more information from them. But there's a whole, we can even discuss, there's a whole other issue with race identity in Brazil that can be very complicated too when thinking about these ideas of representation. So how a citizen sees the leader that is representing them, who the representative is, if it's a woman, if it's a religious person from your religion, if it's a person with racial identity, all those things, and then are the actions really helping a specific group, targeted population? So again, I look specifically at women, and we're going to see here that it gets complicated because women are a big group, and there's other issues within gender as well. So, so the question is this: do women represent women differently than men? Right? That's kind of the idea that kind of started my thinking about this research. And to me, the interest came from the quota law in Brazil and how it didn't work, right? And why it didn't work. And then, so again, this is very descriptive representation, and then now we're moving out to like ideas of substantive representation, how having women in politics changes the dynamic and all that. So this kind of like, when you look at the gender and politics literature, the first generation was really like counting women and seeing how women got elected, and now we're going to the second and third generation, like looking at these issues of now we have women in power. What's the difference between women in the political systems in general, and what impact they have on these ideas? And then I'll talk about symbolic representation. That's a very murky theoretical area. They're still trying to kind of figure out how to kind of address that. So just really quick, women's descriptive representation in Brazil. This is the percentage of women in formal politics since the beginning, the return of democracy, the last 30 years basically. And you can see here it's pretty flat, right? It stays here even after the implementation of the quota law in '96, and the enforcement, the larger enforcement of the quota law in 2010. We still don't see a whole lot of women in politics, right? So in the Chamber of Deputies, that has a quota law. The number has been flat since 1986, really, not even before these ideas. So and I can talk more about this if you want. This is the other part of my research, which is like the evolution of women in politics in Brazil. Why is it that we don't have as many women in politics in Brazil as we have, for example, in Argentina and even Chile, that doesn't have a quota law? Now they do kind of, and still have more women involved in politics. So. So that's where we are in Brazil right now. Is like there's historical legacies of both the Vargas period, the co-optation of women's movements and other movements as well, and also during the dictatorship, which was a complete not a co-optation but completely kind of keeping all kinds of movements, including women's movements, kind of outside of the government. And then when you have a party structure that has been established already with a male leadership, it becomes really hard, for women to get in. Even with the quota law, which was really paying lip service to the Beijing conference in 1995, there weren't that many changes that kind of came from that. So now we have this, and then we have Dilma elected in 2010, and there was like this whole idea, like how did this happen? Brazil is such a sexist country. Brazil, there's no women in politics in Brazil. How is it a woman get elected? To the highest possible field. Yeah.
Do you have any statistics on women in the military?
I do not. No, but I know the numbers are pretty small, and the first admiral ever was just a few years ago. That she was nominated by Dilma actually. So there aren't that many women in the military. At that period, during the dictatorship period, it was the whole leadership was male dominated. Yeah, so then how did Dilma get elected, right? I mean, the simple the answer is Lula, right? I always used to joke, and this is a pretty good joke, if Lula appointed his chair, the chair would win, right? It didn't matter who it was. He came out with 80% approval rating, and he picked Dilma. And there's some discussions that Lula, was really intentional in picking a woman, right? He wanted to keep a legacy, and he wanted to keep a first legacy, like he was the first, operário to be elected, first labor union worker, and he wanted to have a woman. For a long time, if you guys are following Brazilian politics, Marina was kind of the heir to PT and the heir to Lula, but with a lot of issues. I think one of the things is when Lula started kind of seeing Dilma as more of a stronger candidate, Marina ended up splitting from PT. There are of course, other reasons, but there's a lot of people that think that that's one of the reasons she left is because she wanted to run for president and she knew she couldn't under PT. When she was picked, she was Lula's chief of staff. I don't know if you guys, so last night, 2 days ago, there was Lula gave his first interview to The Intercept since the whole scandal was going on. And he kind of threw Dilma under the bus on that interview. In something that I was interested, he said that Dilma had no experience on this interview, to run. And the truth is that she did, right? She was the minister of energy, Madison Energy for him. She was the chief of staff for him for a long time. And he actually picked her, for all those other things. And and during the campaign, it was interesting. That's when I started kind of looking at, and I had to kind of backtrack later on. Is that gender was clearly a part of the discussion, but really it wasn't the main idea. But it was subtly there, and it was always there in a way like the continuation. Like Dilma is the mother, and Lula is the father, right? Dilma is going to continue what Lula's doing. He's going to do better. He's going to be more nurturing, which is very ironic if you know Dilma. And all those things are going to continue. It wasn't like a clear target in the campaign, but I was actually me and Ian were at the official the party convention that kind of that made the nomination, and it was everything was purple because it was the color of the gender group within the PT, and it was like all those symbolic women coming in to talk about she'll be the first woman. So it was a clear PT was really pushing this within the party a whole lot, but in the commercials and things like that, you didn't see as much. But in speeches, Lula was really focusing on this idea that Dilma is the mother of Brazil. Right? He coined the term actually before the elections. Lula called Dilma the mother of PAC, of the acceleration, political acceleration. I forgot what the acronym is for, but it's for the development of Brazil. As chief of staff, she was the one that kind of oversaw that, and he really. Wait, is it? Yes, Programa Acelerado de Crescimento, so accelerated program of growth. All this like PAC, I don't even know what they mean, but we keep talking about them, right? But yeah, so he used this, and then he continued to use this at his speeches, especially in comícios, like in big things, And so gender played a role, but it wasn't a integral role. Like if you look at, Bachelet's campaign, the first campaign, she did have a stronger kind of push for gender. If you look at Christian, if you look comparative to those three countries, Christian's a little different too because she's also, the wife of a president, so the gender wasn't played as much in that as well. But again, it was subtly in there. It was definitely a part of it, but it wasn't, the key deciding factor, for why she won. And again, she won because she was Lula's pick. Again, it doesn't matter what gender, what sexual orientation, what religious affiliation she was. Lula was that popular at the time, and whoever he picked would have been elected. I would argue that whoever he picked would have been elected at that point, right? So Dilma was picked. There's all those discussions that he picked her on purpose because he wanted to run again. After that, that I don't know, but there's a lot of people really early on still say that. Then we come in and to Dilma's election. So she gets elected, and that's where this is like a new project for me, and it's just kind of an interesting thing. I was coding newspaper articles for something else, and then me and my students would start seeing that, some newspapers will use Presidente and some newspapers will use Presidenta, right? And Dilma, from the very beginning, she said, there was an official note coming that she said, well, the government said, both ways are grammatically correct to use. You can use Presidente or Presidenta, but Dilma wants to be called Presidenta, right? She has, Café con Presidenta, it's her show. So this is where this idea of symbolic representation kind of, to me, becomes murky and interesting to kind of look at. So we start looking at newspapers, and the usual suspects, Veja. Actually, Veja is my favorite one because this is running for re-election. And she was not just not Presidenta, she was Presidente Candidata, right? So she wasn't even officially the president anymore. She was running. So it was the only news source that used this was Veja. He used this kind of wording, right? But the usual suspects all use Presidente. The only Brazilian newspaper or magazine that uses Presidenta is Carta Capital. which is the left-leaning, more towards the Workers' Party publication. And then if you look at, most Latin American countries use Presidenta instead of Presidente, but even there, in Colombia, there's a few newspapers that use Presidente. In Argentina, a few newspapers also use Presidente, especially to talk about Kirchner. And it tends to be newspapers that go against her, her policies. They used to work against her policies and things like that. So that's where, that's how I started acting to myself. And this is really early on my this research and kind of thinking about this. Dilma wants to be a symbol for women, right? So this is, I'm going to put this on her speech here. A woman will direct that destiny of the country. All Brazil women feel proud of being a woman. My Supreme Committee and I reiterate is to honor the women, right? So she wants to be a symbol for women, right? So my question is this: like, who decides who is a symbol, right? She's decided she wants to be the symbol, but the media doesn't want to allow her to do that, right? So that, again, it's really early on, but it's just something interesting that kind of relates to what we're seeing today as well, right? In terms of the media wrangling of these ideas, and then the subtle sexism that happens, and some more overt sexism that happens on WhatsApp and social media and things like that.
So these are two very live topics, and I think it's a real privilege to be able to hear Pedro's perspective right now at this really critical juncture in Brazilian politics. And with that, I'll just keep it brief and hand it over to Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you for coming. Let's thank Lacis and the Brazil Initiative for inviting me to do this talk, and it's good timing, I guess.
I'll turn it over to Lisa to introduce our speaker.
Hi. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Lisa Rausch. I work on Brazil issues about library use over in the Nelson Institute. And I'm really excited to introduce to you a friend of mine for going on several years now. We decided, and former colleague when we were both doing our PhDs in different departments at the University of Kansas. This is Pedro dos Santos, and he's an assistant professor at Luther College.
Caribbean and Iberian Studies program, and very happy to see such a great turnout today for this talk. As you probably noticed, there's some snacks and coffee and tea in the back there, as well as a bunch of handouts about some other events that we have coming up. I did want to mention that this lecture is part of a whole month of Brazil that we have. There's a handout back there as well that has information about all of the other upcoming. There's some musical performances, some other lectures, etc. A film as part of the Wisconsin Film Festival that are all Brazil focused. So that's all I really have to say. So welcome. Thanks for coming down the road into Iowa. And he's here to talk to, well, he's an expert on gender issues in Brazilian politics. And we have a couple of projects that are going on right now about women's representation in the country of Brazil, in particular. One project that explores Dilma Rousseff's impact on women's representation in Brazil, and another dealing with the impact of Brazilian electoral institutions on the election of women to legislative